Welcome to the Insurance Hot Seat, a special series by the GEEK Freaks Podcast dedicated to answering the tough questions in the insurance industry.
The Insurance Hot Seat.
On today's podcast, I'd like to welcome Tara Smith of the Birchfield Independent Insurance Agency. How are you today, Tara?
Hey, Ron. Good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, appreciate the time. So the topic today is going to be something that you're very close to, how to start an independent agency. And I guess the do's and don'ts or what you learned on this journey.
Yeah, it's kind of it's an exciting thing for people that are thinking about doing it, because I feel like everybody really wants to, kind of a dream for a lot of people, especially if they're working as like just producers for an agency and they kind of want to get started on their own, or if they started in the captive world, like working for like a captive agency like a State Farm or Farmers or Farm Bureau, and are thinking about going to the independent side.
So when you made that leap, was it just of your own volition, like, hey, I'm ready to do this on my own?
Well,
it seems like it's a scary thing to do, because most of these captive agencies are pretty cushy. You're getting your leads.
It's definitely easier. Yeah, it's definitely easier to start. I feel like the kind of corporate captive world gives you a lot more support when you're starting, especially if you're brand new to the industry. Usually they set you up with like a nice co-op. They kind of sometimes will pay your rent for a while and give you really generous starting commissions. Like, I've heard things of up to 300%, like a standard good commission rate. Generally speaking, in the independent world, is 15% of your written premium. So when you talk about like 100%, 300%, that's huge numbers. But that's only for like a certain period of time, like, maybe your first to 3 years in business. But it really is helpful when you first start. And on the independent side, it's really not like that. You're much more on your own.
So when you go independent, you either have to have the overhead of having a location, you have to have the overhead of the tools.
Right. I would say when you're starting, when I started in 2008, my dad was an insurance agent, a captive insurance agent, actually, for his whole career. So I worked for him, like all through school and, when I was in my early 20s, and just kind of starting out in the working world. So I learned a lot from him, but I learned the captive world really well. And in 2008, he actually had cancer. So he decided that it was time for him to retire. And again, it's sort of like in the captive world, when you're in the captive world, you really don't have ownership of your book of business. It's the company's business. So that's one of the reasons why people really like the idea of going independent, because generally you have much more ownership of your business. You're much more in control. So I could not buy my dad's book of business. I couldn't just take over, the book of business that I had worked for all those years. So that's when I said, well, now probably is a good time to look at, opening my own agency and independent of any corporate company, and kind of be my own thing.
Now, if you stay in that community, so you can't, I imagine there's non-competes, all that good stuff, but if you stay in the community, that is good, because they still know you and they still know your name, and maybe they still want to come to you because the relationship is not necessarily with the agency, but with you.
Right. Yes, there is an element of that, but one of my points actually was going to be to talk about how when you're captive and when you're thinking about going independent, or even if you're a producer working for somebody and you have a dream of going independent, you want to have your own agency, one thing to be mindful of is that the book of business or the clientele that you have with the captive carrier, like with your AAA or State Farm or, whatever, Allstate, whatever agency, whatever company that you represent, does not necessarily mean that book of business is going to be a great fit for the independent market. The companies kind of all want different things. And a lot of times, it's like always that you have to be realistic with yourself. Like, the grass is always going to be greener and I'm going to be making so much more money. That's not necessarily the case. Like, especially when you start, I would say that there's a percentage that you can definitely rewrite over to the independent agency that you decide to start. But even before you do that, like once you first start and once you first say, okay, I'm going to start this agency, this is what I want to do, you have to look at how you're actually going to do that. So um, let's say that you're a producer and you have a clientele or a book of business that you can work with. Number one, you're always going to have a non-compete of some nature. Generally speaking, it'll be a year. I think that it's harder to enforce those longer ones. You may have signed something for 3 years, but I think that it's really hard to enforce that. But that's a whole different, topic. But just think, okay, you're not going to be able to probably touch that book of business for a year. So what do? Like how do you get numbers on the board? How do you get books, business on the books, So you have to think about, okay, am I going to just go after direct appointments myself, which is very, very difficult to do. So you can contact, different independent carriers and say, hey, I'm starting a scratch agency. Will you give me an appointment? Will you give me the opportunity to write business? In the past and historically, within the past 10 years, it's been very, very difficult to do that. Companies will not just appoint you because you're starting and you have this dream, it's a great thought, but it's really unrealistic. So you have to look at, okay, what markets am I going to have? The other thing that you can do is you can join like an aggregator or a cluster group, which is sometimes they're referred to as cluster groups. And that's basically like you join a master agency. There's fees involved with it. Everyone kind of has their own set of startup fees and then commission splits. So, for example, you join like a cluster group and they will give you access to a certain number of markets. So you have then the ability to write business through these markets that they're giving you access to. It's not free, so you split your commission in some fashion, whether it's, 70-30, 80-20, 90-10. It just totally depends on what their guidelines are. But that gives you an opportunity to start writing business right away without having to go out and like beat the streets for your own appointments yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Your own contracts. So that's one way to do it. There's no perfect situation. There's no perfect you're never going to get everything you want. You're never going to get the perfect situation, so you have to be prepared that you're going to have to make concessions and sort of look at the entire picture. But that, I think, for me, that's how I did it. I joined an aggregator, which gave me access to some really good personal and commercial lines markets here in Michigan that gave me the ability to kind of start writing business and kind of solidify and get going and grow from there.
What year did you go out on your own?
So I started the whole process in 2008, and I would say that I was like fully operational and going really hard at it by 2010. I did a slower kind of transition because I was still working with my dad and helping him kind of get his stuff set up for retirement. And then I kind of I was fully operational by 2010.
Yeah, isn't it? It's kind of the same thing that we did here at Omega. So we joined forces in it's my 11th year, so 2000 and something, and it took us 24 months to really finally get a product off the ground.
Exactly,
so it's always
it's
this
a process.
come up, and I think a lot of people look at it like you said, like, okay, it's not a new adventure. They get pie-eyed, the grass is greener type situation.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And you're like, oh no, strap in, buddy. It's gonna be It's a wild ride.
Exactly, I know. And that's another thing, like you have to be prepared for your first. That's why most agencies fail within statistically the first 3 years, because those are the hardest. You're not bringing in the money maybe that you're used to bringing in. Like it's every policy. I remember the first policy that I wrote, like the client, I remember because it was so, it's just meaningful because every single one matters. Every single one you lose, you know about, you feel it.
Yep. No,
so it's very dramatic, and it's like, so you have to be in a position financially to know, okay, like this is not going to be a great, this is not going to be a great windfall. It's not a steady thing. It's very bumpy, at first. So you have to be really prepared for that.
So after you get with your aggregator, your cluster group, you're going down the road.
Yeah.
What does the next iteration look like for you?
Well, it kind of depends on the focus of what focus you want your agency to have. So a lot of people say it's really great to have like a niche market. So when you first start, you want to have a market. This is one idea, but you want to have a market or a stream of clients that you're really good on. Like, for example, something that I do a lot of is contractors, like artisan contractors, smaller artisan contractors, HVAC, plumbing, some electrical, painting, drywall, those type of occupations.
Yep.
So when I started, I had several really good small commercial markets targeted to those kind of businesses. So that gave me kind of a starting point where I could kind of call around and started getting referrals from people or businesses that I had written, that had similar, like friends or associates or colleagues that were in the same business. So niche marketing is something that a lot of agencies have success with. I had success with it. And that's a way to kind of get business on the books. And then also like just a lot of people are doing like the Facebook advertising and the SEO stuff, and that helps just to get volume in the door, like people calling.
Eyes on it, yeah.
And then a certain portion of those you'll write. And then off of that, you really want to, I anyway think that you really need to make a strong effort to ask for referrals. Like a lot of people, for some reason, are scared to say, who do you know? Like, do you have family that I can call that's looking to save money on their insurance? Or do you know other business owners that do the same thing and we can call them and reach out and see if we can save them money? You have to be really proactive about asking for referrals because so much of my business is built on that. I think that more so important on the independent side because it's all word of mouth. And you don't have that big brand power like that State Farm or that Farmers. You're not, Birchfield Insurance is not having commercials on the TV.
Yeah,
you know what
you're
I
not
mean?
having a
So
Super
people
Bowl
do not
commercial.
know me. Right. So people are, I'm not visible out there like, but I've done a really good job as branding myself as an independent insurance agency. So if people are looking for independent insurance agents in my area, I do come up really well on Google because you have to go with that. You have to differentiate yourself from just good prices on auto or good prices on whatever, you have to sort of build on what you have and really be proactive about asking for those referrals, I think.
So to sum it up, it's more of knowing your market and knowing your target market, right? And kind of being it's such a term that's overused, but like a trusted advisor, right? I know what you need.
That term.
I know.
But yes.
It's
it
very
really is overused, but exactly it is. But I know what you're saying. Yeah, you want to really make yourself a little bit different, and people now are really, especially with like the reform here in Michigan that's happening, people are really more focused on like, sort of individual attention and somebody that's independent that's not necessarily just working for one company. So I feel like there's opportunity to brand yourself as that instead of, like how the captive companies are just so, behind their own brand, like State Farm or what AAA, whatever. They push that brand instead of like pushing me, myself, Tara Smith, like let me help you.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important because you're selling based on relationship and rapport versus a branding. Like, I saw your commercial and I maybe can save 30% on my car insurance, so I'm going to talk to you. And
then if I can just touch on one other thing too that I think is important for people that are starting. So if you're starting an agency or looking to start an agency, you have to really think about the future and think about what your exit strategy is or perpetuation agreement. So a lot of these aggregators, when you're looking at them, obviously you're not thinking about, retiring or selling or what you're going to do in 20 or 30 years, but it's important to look at the exit strategy and read your contract with those aggregators, because a lot of them have first right of refusal if you want to sell the book. You can't just take it to anybody. You have to take it to them first. Or if you do want to sell it outside of the group or the cluster group or the aggregator, there's big fees involved in that. So that's really important to make sure that you know what you're getting into.
Is that something that you can negotiate on the sign up side, or is it just like
everything,
these are the rules?
Yes. I think everything is negotiable until it's not,
Yeah,
so I think true. That ask for everything and you might get some of it.
Yeah.
It just depends. So there were things that I definitely did negotiate in my contract that I thought were more favorable to myself, there were definitely reasons behind it. But yes, I would say, yes, try to negotiate everything,
I think
you definitely won't get it all, but you might get some things.
No, that's like you said, ask for everything and be grateful and thankful for what you get, because
exactly right.
You don't ask, you're not
exactly.
I think at all.
Right. You got to try,
So if you, if you had to kind of sum up your adventure in, you've been doing it very well, but like what a word of advice or like, hey, wear a helmet because it's going to get rough, whatever it is, you've gotten to a point where you're fairly you're successful in what you do, and
Sure.
I don't want to say you made it to the top, but you're making it to where you want to go.
Sure, yeah.
What can you, give to somebody that's sitting in their State Farm cubicle right now, maybe listening to this podcast, being like, I want to do this. What is my next move? So what advice can you give them?
I would say just you have to have a lot of patience, and you have to really be ready to I don't want to sound negative, but be ready to weather the storm and don't give up. This is a business that you constantly have to recommit yourself to all the time, because you'll lose a big account and you'll just be devastated because, I don't know, maybe there's some people that don't take it personally. I take everything personally to a fault,
even
though I know I shouldn't, but I would say just don't give up. Like, you have to just really, if this is your dream and this is really what you think you want to do, there's going to be it's a big time commitment. It's money commitment, and you're not necessarily going to get your return. But I promise you, at the end of the day, it is worth it. It is the best avenue to sell insurance if you want to be on the sales side is the independent side, in my opinion.
And
The money is the best, the support is the best. You have so much freedom.
I was gonna say you get a lot of like soft benefits of that too. You're working your tail off, but if you got to make a soccer game at 4:00, you can certainly make a soccer game. You can,
right? Exactly. Yeah, there's lots of, in my opinion, the pros definitely outweigh the cons. And as long as you can be committed to the business and just really be steadfast in what you're doing and believe in yourself and have a good business plan is so important too. You will be successful.
No, I think that's great. I think that's solid advice. I like the I know you touched on it, and it's not negative. It's the truth, right? Is everybody, when you make these career changes and these giant leaps,
right,
it's scary, and it's going to be scarier, and you're going to, the monster behind the door that you think is there is probably there, and he's probably a little bit meaner than you think, but like anything else, you'll get through it. You really will, yeah. Incredibly hard to be an entrepreneur and take that risk on yourself.
It is, but it's really worth it, I think. And just thinking about, like, I remember, all of the different, hoops that you had to jump through when you were, working on the captive side. You really, they really want to treat you like an employee, but you get none of the benefits.
Yeah.
You still don't get any paid time off or health insurance or anything like that. You're still working like crazy and constantly, and you just don't. I just feel like on the independent side, you get so much more benefit and so much more freedom, and you're really much more in control of your own destiny as far as, your vision and what you see, how you want to grow and how you want to work.
And speaking of vision, because that was going to be my next question, what do you see in the future for Birchfield?
Oh my gosh.
And what you want to do?
Right. Well, that's a great question.
You don't have to give me all the secrets. Is it a brick and mortar?
I think I would eventually want to. Ideally, I think everybody wants to work less. And I can see, like, I would eventually like to. I think about hiring producers or a producer and maybe a CSR. Right now, I'm doing everything myself, my sales and my servicing. So I would love to have a little bit more freedom as I get older and do more things outside of the office. But I think that right now with technology, we're in a great position to be able to be really mobile. So I feel like that's a good plan. I would like to get producers, and I would like to grow on a level that's larger and kind of branch out a little bit more with producers. And I would really like to write more commercial insurance. Right now my book is probably a 60-40 split in favor of personal lines. And I feel like with all of the changes that we've had in the personal lines market here in Michigan, I feel like commercial lines is a little bit labor intensive, and I enjoy it more now. So I feel like I would like to transition to be I'd like to flip-flop that. I'd like to be 60% commercial lines, 40% personal lines. I'd like to grow my commercial lines segment.
Nice.
So those are my plans.
No, that's awesome. And I think success is always varied in everybody's mind, right? So success to me at one point was, I would just love to have another employee to help me. There's
of course.
15 of us, 16 of us now, and I never thought it was. And it's crazy, and I still don't feel the bad thing about being an entrepreneur is you never feel successful. You never feel like you got to the top.
I know. You're constantly looking at that next goal or next set of.
But you can't let that stare you down either, right?
Exactly,
so you have to stand there
no.
and say, I did this. Like,
yes, absolutely. I created this.
Yes. And the biggest thing that we don't ever do, because we're constantly looking at the horizon and looking at the next challenge, is not living in the moment of saying we did this. So if you make that leap out of the cube and into freedom necessarily, that is a victory in its own and should be recognized as one, right?
Yes,
it's not
absolutely.
It's not success
100%.
to everybody can be very different. And it's great to hear that you have such a clear vision in what you want, because a lot of times when I talk to entrepreneurs, they're just like, well, I want to make more money. Well,
I know.
How are we going to make more money? What does that look like?
Me too, but
yeah, 100%.
I know.
We all, if you ask anybody, not even an entrepreneur, what are you going to do? I want to make more money.
Yeah.
Because I'm a tech guy. What do you have what tools are you using, if you don't mind sharing? Like
so
agency management software, or you just?
Yeah, we do have an agency management program. I'm constantly reevaluating that because I feel like I don't get as much as I should out of my agency management system. But I mean, really, as far as that goes, I mean, there's expenses related to that. But I mean, most of the carrier rating are all web-based.
Yep.
So really, you just need a good computer. And yes, I would say a management system is a requirement. It's really helpful in tracking like activities with clients, conversations, different events that come up, changes that you make. Documentation is so important with everything that we do. So I do use that. I do, a lot of communication by email and texting now, which there's lots of different software programs for texting with clients that will sync up with your management system so that you can have a record of those texts, because that, again, is really important. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's really like, it's not that tech,
it's not too tech heavy. I mean, essentially, you have a laptop that turns on and a few tools.
Exactly, right.
And I think
I just need my scanner and, my cell phone, and you're good, yeah.
And I think it's important to kind of put out there, too, is if you're looking to make this jump, you don't need to go into the AMSs or the TAMs of the world.
No,
there's plenty of options.
No. There really is.
Cost-effective, easy to use.
Yeah, there really are, especially when you're just starting. There's a lot of really small, nice agency management systems. Again, I don't think there's a perfect one, but I do think that there are a lot of options for agents that are just starting out that don't need, like the huge, because those can get very expensive and intimidating. And honestly, you just don't need it. They're for very large agencies. They have a lot of producers that are doing a lot of accounting because they're paying all these producers. So you just need something that's a little bit more basic that's going to help you streamline your workflows and really just keep track of what you're doing in an organized fashion, which there are a lot of great options now.
And
Easy Links, Hawksoft, QQ Catalyst, some people really like. So it's just a matter of finding the right one that fits your budget and what you're looking to do.
Yeah, and you don't need necessarily, so the big dogs in the industry that have always ruled and will continue to rule, you don't necessarily need to get into them yet.
No.
I think a lot of people look at it and be like, well, they're the standard, and they are. They are completely 100% standard, but, baby steps, because you're going to increase over it.
Right. And in the beginning, especially in those first 3 years, it's so important to keep your costs as small as possible.
Yeah, well, you're figuring out, what am I doing, right? It's
right.
You don't want to add
what
more
works
wood
and what
to the
doesn't.
fire.
Right, exactly.
Tara, this has
keep
been
it small, keep it simple.
This has been awesome, right? So this is, to me, it's been I don't want eye-openings used a lot too, but it's been very eye-opening to me to see the path that you have taken and that you've made a choice to take, right? No one forced you to do this. You took on this challenge.
No, right.
You're striving in it. You're not just surviving, you're thriving, you're doing everything right, and you're very happy. You sound very, very happy and content with what you're doing. So it's fantastic.
Oh, good.
And I hope that.
Good, Ron. Thank you.
No, and I hope that this has inspired, anybody sitting there thinking I should do this.
I hope so.
Yeah,
do it.
Do it. I mean, be calculated about it. Just don't go screaming out of the office.
Be smart about it. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Don't quit today.
Yeah. It's perfect. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate the honesty and the openness about the whole situation. And I look forward to, running into you in the market out there.
Awesome.
Thanks, Tara.
Anytime. Thanks, Ron.
Stay warm too. I know we got a little bit of snow, so stay warm.
Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.